Good day, everybody. Welcome to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we've been into the wonderful book, Everyday Holiness, the Jewish Spiritual Path of Mussar. And we've gone over some great topics. Yesterday, we covered Emunah, or faith, and Yiras, which has to do with fear and awe of heaven. And so we've covered some beautiful topics up to this point, like enthusiasm, silence, generosity, truth, moderation, loving kindness, responsibility, trust, like I mentioned, faith and awe. And today we're getting into actually doing Mussar. So we've discussed up to this point what Mussar in fact is in some of the categories. Shalom, Sheila, glad to have you with us. And so now we're going to talk about doing it. And this is exciting, and we hope you guys are enjoying this. We're about 72% into this book. We should be done in a few more days. So, let's just jump right in and let's get some ground covered. So now we're in the third part, the final part of the book, doing Mussar. Okay. The purpose of Mussar is to help you identify your spiritual curriculum, and then to give you the tools that will help you consciously and effectively engage with the inner work that lies before you. Mussar is summarized in the phrase Tikkun Midot HaNefesh, improving or remedying the traits of your soul. That is a beautiful statement. Improving or remedying the traits of your soul. And it takes some focused effort over a period of time to bring about this rectification. Put simply, practice is how you work on and master your spiritual curriculum. Excellent. Mussar aims to help you close the gap between your ideals and the life you actually lead. This convergence is brought about one small step at a time through practice. Practice doesn't involve seeking some sort of spiritual generator to fill you with light, because all the holiness you need already lives within. Instead, practice focuses on recalibrating specific soul traits that are obstructions to your soul's light from shining into your life. That makes perfect sense, right? Life comes with tests. And usually the tests we face are right in line with the state of our personal soul traits. Isn't that so true? If your tendency is to lie, you will be tested by situations that call for truth. If you are tight-fisted, the test will be of your generosity. It is said that Abraham faced 10 tests in his life. Abraham is acknowledged as the master of the soul trait of loving kindness, or chesed, and yet none of his tests focused on loving kindness, because that was his strength. Rather, he was tested on the soul trait of strength, or gevura, which is traditionally set opposite and complementary to chesed. So keep that in mind. Each test we face is a rung on a ladder of spiritual life. And as you pass or fail your tests, you rise or descend spiritually. I call the moment a test arises in the midst of real life Mussar work. Mussar practice is how we prepare for our inevitable encounters with Mussar work. The Kelm Yeshiva stressed the value of practice. The altar of Kelm assigned the task of cleaning the yeshiva building to the best students, and explained why with a pun on the Yiddish verb kurt, which means both to sweep and to overturn. Veres kert du kert die Welt. Whoever sweeps here overturns the world. Sweeping is considered to be a practice that liberates us from selfish desires. Sweep away the obstacles and your world will be transformed. Makes sense? It will take a lot of words to explain Mussar practice clearly and to answer questions that I know frequently come up. But be assured that once you have digested all these words, what you will have in hand is a simple daily and weekly practice that takes a total of only 2 to 3 hours per week. Wow. The personal nature of Moosa practice. No two people are spiritually identical. In consequence, Moosa practice is always geared to the uniqueness of the individual because we all have a different set of soul traits to contend with. The practices that will have the most effect on us will also vary from person to person and even for the same person at different points in life. This reality is acknowledged in the story I told in chapter 5 about the Moosa students who complained about the other students who were contemplating a decaying fish. Does it work? As their teacher's response, that is the bottom line on Moosa practice. Is it effective in bringing about deep and lasting spiritual change? I recognize that we each have our own spiritual curriculum and that different practices will work better for some and not for others. So I must state an important caution right here at the beginning. It's entirely true that you may need to focus on a trait that I have in perfect balance, while your greatest trait will elude me. It is also true that you will find that my favorite practice just doesn't work for you. You will reach those conclusions through experimentation and self-analysis, and that's what necessitates this caution. When you hear an inner voice saying that trait is just not important to me, or that practice has no effect, or this is boring, I caution you to be very skeptical about who is speaking those whispered words. It could be the voice of good, sensible judgment. It could also be the voice of that adversary to growth and change, your own Yetzer Hara. Although you are right to seek a customized practice that works just for you, at the same time, Moosa practice requires a degree of submission to the form and trust that change will happen. If you give heed to every doubt, criticism, and even mocking notion that comes up from within, your practice will be subverted. That is precisely the challenge that the evil inclination sets for you. Moosa practice requires that you balance watching, learning, and adjusting with being steadfast and persistent. That attitude of persistence will help you overcome the momentary objections of the evil inclination that the evil inclination throws your way, which are nothing but attempts to see if you can be deflected from the course. You should expect that you will be susceptible to the deflection. One reason for this is that after you have taken on and engaged in some serious Moosa practice, no change will be visible to your inner eye. You do your practice and it does leave its trace on your soul, but your mind looks around within the field of its limited light and sees no visible change. That makes sense since the whole point is to bring about change at a much deeper, unconscious level. Still, your evil inclination will whisper or maybe even shout, "See, this isn't working. Do you see any change? What a waste of time. You could be doing this or that instead," and so on. But you persist with your practice, and then one day you find yourself in a situation to which you would typically, habitually, and predictably respond in a certain way. And suddenly you are aware that you have a different option. Where did that new thought come from? Or maybe it is not even a thought, but you respond spontaneously in an atypical way, and a way that comes closer to the values you've been striving for. What opened up that new possibility for you? It did not come from your conscious mind, but from deeper within, where your Moosa practice has been making its mark in a domain where the light of the intellect simply does not shine. As a practitioner, you have to trust Moosa practice and trust that it is doing its work. As you will see, the practices themselves are benign, nothing radical or extreme. As well, these practices have been with us for generations. If they were ineffective or if they had negative effects, we'd know by now. Instead, what we have are reports as well as direct experience of people who have elevated and strengthened their higher selves through practicing Mussar. People used to say about Rabbi Yehuda Leib Nekritz, who was Rabbi Per's father-in-law, that when he did Mussar, he wasn't a person but an angel. They also said that when he was born, he was smooth as silk, meaning that his inborn character was very good. But after Mussar, they would say, and they would never complete the sentence. If silk was the starting point, there were no words to describe where he went from there. Traditionally, Mussar has been practiced under the direct supervision of a teacher in a community of fellow seekers, usually a yeshiva. The name given to the role of a Mussar guide is mashgiach, which in Hebrew means literally supervisor. Often, the title is qualified as mashgiach ruchanit, spiritual supervisor. Doing Mussar is meant to be a powerful experience that penetrates to the inner depths, and so supervision can be very important to ensuring that the seeker stays in safe and positive territory while still being challenged and moved along the path. As well, a community of seekers provides companionship and interaction to strengthen and guide the individual. The Moosa practice that follows is based on the experience I have had guiding people who are not in intimate contact with a mashgiach or living in an intense, specialized spiritual religious community. It is still best to do Mussar under the watchful eye of a mashgiach and in the company of fellow seekers. But when that is not possible, the next best thing is to cultivate an inner mashgiach of your own on whom you can rely. While I mention a few practices that do require supervision, like visualization and chanting, the Mussar regime described here has been practiced by hundreds of people and has proven itself to be feasible, effective, and safe without supervision. The stages of Mussar practice. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter recognized and identified that there are 3 stages in the practice of Mussar. Understanding these 3 stages will make clear why the patterns of practice have developed as they have. These 3 stages work from the backbone for everything that follows. Number 1, stage 1, sensitivity. You begin Mussar practice by becoming sensitive to the soul traits that operate within you and seeing how they motivate you to think, say, and do the things you do. You seek to heighten your awareness of what is actual within yourself, both of things that are working favorably and things that are in need of attention. You can't go anywhere in your practice until you can identify your soul traits and see clearly how they operate within you. This opening stage is crucially important as it sets the agenda for everything that might follow. Rabbi Yeskiel Levenstein, who was trained in the Mussar Center of Kelm and went on to be a great influence of the last generation, underlines the importance of developing sensitivity in the context of Mussar practice. It was very often stated in the Bet Talmud of Kelm that in order for a man to listen and understand Mussar, he must first sensitize his feelings. Without that, he might listen and learn for an entire lifetime and not know at all what Mussar is or what it demands of him. For Mussar involves the most delicate sensitivity. Another teacher from that same generation, Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac Schur, clarifies exactly what sort of sensitivity we are after. He cites that teachings of the sages from the Talmud that report that when King Saul, heard David being praised, Saul, had a shrinking feeling and he envied him. Based on this comment, Rabbi Schur identifies what we look for when we seek to be sensitive. From their words, we can see that the generation of envy is accompanied by a sinking feeling, a fleeting transitory thought to which man pays little attention. Rabbi Schur is teaching us a key lesson. Only by being consciously aware of inner sensations as these occur in our interior world can we know what is happening moment to moment with respect to our soul traits. He goes on to underline what is important about this awareness of inner sensations. One who is aware of how jealousy develops in the heart understands that if he experiences a sinking feeling when hearing his friend being praised, he had better fortify the musings of his heart with wisdom and knowledge. First, you have to be aware of what you feel when jealousy arises. Those feelings are cues to take appropriate action. Without that awareness, jealousy will arise and flourish unexamined and uninhibited. and the consequences are likely to be destructive, as we read in the story of the first murder recorded in the Torah when jealousy prompted Cain to kill Abel. Rabbi Shur is discussing jealousy just as an illustration. What he says applies to all soul traits. The goal he sets is to be one who is sensitive to the images of his heart. These images are sensations that arrive prior to a thought even taking form. You are able to see and notice the sparks of impatience before your foot starts tapping. Are you familiar with the inner stirrings that signal desire before your hand has started to move? Can you be aware of the first tiny inner ripple that is headed towards building into a wave of self-glorification? Sensitivity means being aware of the seed of thought, word, feeling, or deed as early as possible in its cycle of germination and birth. The more acute your awareness of what moves within you, the earlier you will see what is arising, and the more you will have choice over the course that inner impulse will take. So we enter into Moosa Practice recognizing that it is vitally important to cultivate inner sensitivity. As well, we must be sensitive to the effect that we have on others. This type of sensitivity may seem to be of a quite different sort, but actually it's not, because only your own inner sensors can register the effect your behavior has on others. You know from your own experience how people can anger or hurt you, and yet they can be completely oblivious to the impact of their words or actions are having. That's not how we want to be. We should not always aim to please people, and sometimes quite the opposite, but the measure of how well our intentions are translating into reality can be gauged from the responses of others. The importance of paying attention to life and the way your surroundings respond to you is emphasized in Proverbs. The ear that hears the reproof of life will abide among the wise. What a proverb. Beautiful. Hearing is a sense, and to practice Mussar means becoming delicately and perceptively sensitive. Step 2, stage 2, self-restraint. Though the ultimate goal of Mussar practice is the total transformation of a soul trait, along the way and after you become sensitive to the negative role a trait is playing in your life, you need to make a conscious effort to control the behavior that arises from that trait. Once you are aware of your behavioral patterns, you need to try to rein in potential soul-damaging behavior or push the road. You will want to look at the trait or traits that may be motivating the tendency to lie, which could be honor, love, pride, trust, or something else. But at this stage, all you are concerned about is restraining the loose lips themselves. You have to guard your tongue. This will mean holding to a very strict standard of truth, measuring your words on a scale of truth while they are still thoughts and before you say anything. Proverbs is a good guide here, too, as well as an inspiration. Whoever restrains his lips is wise. In this stage of Moosa practice, you do what you can to restrain and guide your words and deeds in regard to those soul traits that are on your spiritual curriculum. If you are aware that you are impatient, you strive to be more patient. If you have a tendency to lust, you consciously direct your eyes the other way. If you are rather stingy, it is your will that tells you your hand to reach into your pocket or purse. I recall an incident when I walked by a plate of cookies. I wasn't hungry, but they appealed to my greed. I asked myself if it was within my capacity not to reach out my hand. It was, and I didn't. Exercising your will to do something and not to do others is a great and necessary practice. This is so key. This sort of action will bring your outer life more in line with your inner value, which is itself the Torah value. What a statement. And that's part of the creative value you have. You can exercise your will and do certain things and not do others, keeping that in mind. In time, the Mooser teachers assure us the efforts we make to steer our behavior through self-restraint will trigger internal change. The teachers saw great benefit in using personal behavior as a transformative tool, as illustrated by the 13th century saying from the Sefer HaChinuk, one's heart is drawn after one's outer actions. Whoa. As you do, so you become. As you do, so you become. What a statement. In The Path of the Just, the Ramchal tells us external motions instigate internal motions. What he means is that actions you take that relate to a specific soul trait can have the effect of change on that trait. You don't have to hold back from acting until the trait has changed. Acting itself will generate the reworked inner way of being. Our teachers assure us that consciously choosing to practice certain behaviors will, in time, cause something new to take root deep within, and our second nature will be transformed as a result of our actions. This principle applies to all soul traits, as Rabbi Luzzatto says concerning the trait of enthusiasm. The best advice for the person in whom this desire does not burn is that he consciously enthuse himself so that enthusiasm might eventually become second nature to him. External movement arouses the internal, and you certainly have more of a command over the external than the internal. If you know something about psychology, you may see a parallel here to ideas that would be called behavioristic. Behaviorism is a movement rather than relying on. In psychology and philosophy, that emphasizes the outward behavioral aspects of thought and tends to dismiss the inward experience, which is where it begins to distinguish itself from Mussar. Behaviorism is concerned with inward experiences or states of consciousness, whereas Mussar is deeply concerned with the inner life. Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe has defined Mussar as building an interior world. But Mussar splits off even further from behaviorism because its concern is for the soul within the context of a spiritual universe with a God, and this is far from behavioristic perspective. Though Mussar and behaviorism both recognize that actions have real impact, they differ in their understanding and appreciation for what that impact is, where it is registered, and why it should be stimulated. Rabbi Luzzatto ends his comment on how external actions can create an internal legacy by saying, experience testifies to this. It's interesting to see him bring this source of confirmation rather than relying on the proof text of Torah and Talmud. It seems that he wants to let us know that he directly experienced the internal changes that accompanied his behavioral change. Of course, he can refer only to his own experience, but by doing so, he encourages us to trust his experience and apply his teachings to our own lives. Your will does have transformative potency, though that power is limited. Very important, which is why people so frequently break pledges and resolutions. Quitting smoking is easy, the joke goes. I've done it hundreds of times. Still, your will is a power with which you have been gifted, and once you are aware that something is clearly out of line, bringing your will into play will have some positive effect. Stage 3, transformation. The ultimate step of Moosa practice is to rework the problematic soul trait so thoroughly at its root that it no longer stands as a barrier to the light of holiness and the connectivity of the soul. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter speaks about the self-restraint stage of Moosa practice we just considered and contrasts it to the form stage of transformation. The first is for one to overcome his nature so that he does not commit evil. The second is to change one's nature so that he performs good. The second aspect is more difficult than the first, for it is more difficult to transform one's nature than to overcome his nature. Therefore, man must develop stage by stage. Initially, he should strive to fulfill the precept, turn from evil, from Psalms 34:15. This is a first aspect of growth. Afterwards, he should strive to fulfill the imperative to do good, which is the second and more advanced level. The Mussar Matters have developed many techniques to transform soul traits, as well as many variations on these methods. Three practices that illustrate what is involved in the transformation of soul traits are visualization, contemplation, and impassioned chanting. A visualization is a vivid image held in the mind. A contemplation is a deep idea that is wrestled with. And Mussar chanting involves the repetition of a phrase over and over with melody and emotions as well as meaning. These sort of practices are to be done while in retreat from the world of your daily life. None of these methods is analytical. Keep that in mind. Each, in its own way, is meant to generate felt experience, which the Altar of Navarodak designates sensory learning. Visualization, contemplation, and chanting all create experiences that leave their lasting trace at a deep inner level, far deeper and more effectively than an intellectual idea can penetrate. This is how they are transformative. Mussar starts from the premise that the roots of our thoughts, words, or feelings and deeds are buried deep within the inner realm, beyond the range of the conscious mind. The unconscious sources from which your life flows are designed to be out of sight. And so, no matter how hard you strain and stare, you aren't going to be able to catch even the slightest glimpse of what lives in those permanently shadowy depths. Rabbi Leffen writes in Hesbon Hanefesh in his early 19th century, decades before the birth of psychology, it is clear that a considerable number of the motions of the psyche are concealed in the hidden chambers of man's heart every day, one within another, so that he no longer knows or recognizes them. But the more deeply they are hidden, the more strongly they do act within the psyche. It follows, then, that a transformation in our thoughts, words, feelings, and actions requires practice that have an impact at that deep inner level as well. Important. To continue to illustrate with the example of truth, it should be clear that if you have become sensitized to the role untruth is playing in your life, you will next do what you can to swear off falsehood. That will mean consciously guarding your tongue so the impulses to lie is restrained and overcome. But it is much greater to transform yourself so that this impulse no longer exists. Instead of curbing the desire to tell a lie, the thought of lying simply does not arise in you. The step to transformation involves focused practice, not aimed at the sole trait of truth itself, but rather at what it is that is motivating the lying. There will be an underlying trait that is being served by straying from the truth. Keep that in mind at all times when you're dealing with liars. You may lie to gain honor or for financial advantage or some other perceived advantage. To be completely freed of the tendency to lie requires that this casual trait be reprogrammed, not with ideas, but with the sorts of direct experiences that can wire new patterns of thought and feeling from deep within. Do this, and it will not even occur to you to act in habitual negative ways, nor will it take any act of restraint to adhere to good and beneficial speech and deeds. Wow. I see we don't have many people joining us today. How about on Facebook? Shalom, Michael in Germany. Welcome. Who else we got on YouTube? All right. I'm going to keep going. Identifying your spiritual curriculum. With this background of explanation and theory, I'm now ready to outline a Mussar practice you can take on in your own life. As you have learned, the starting point is to become sensitive to the reality of what is true for you. Next, you need to take steps to restrain and avoid your negative patterns. Ultimately, your goal is to change yourself so profoundly that you will have reworked your impulses and intuitions. I've been saying all along that the starting point to doing Moosa Practice is identifying your personal spiritual curriculum. Now is the time to do so. You take your first step into this practice by setting out a list of the traits that you need to focus on, because these are the ones that are obstructing the light of holiness from shining brightly in your life. Traditionally, the norm has been to compose a list of 13 soul traits. Try to find, this is the pattern given in the book Hespon Hanefesh, and that was implicitly endorsed by Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who made known of a list of 13 that he held to be of great importance. It is possible to work with a smaller number of traits and complicated to go for more. I'll explain the logic to a list of 13. In Moosa Practice, when we focus on the first soul trait from your list for just 1 week, then move on to the second trait for the next week, and so on throughout your full list. After you have focused for 1 week on each trait on your list, then you go back to the beginning and repeat the whole cycle. This pattern of practice is based on the recognition that inner change happens most effectively when you exercise a single trait intensely for a limited period of time, after which you put it on the back burner until it comes around for another week once again. For any given week, you'll be majoring in one trait, and you will also have a list of other traits that you are minoring in. You have a list of 13 traits. It will take 13 weeks to go through the full cycle, after which you'll go back to the beginning and start again. It works out neatly that if your list has 13 traits, then you can fit 4 cycles into 1 year, as 4 times 13 equals 52, the number of weeks in a year. Although it may seem like a period of 1 week focused on one trait is far too little time to accomplish a task like becoming more generous or less angry or more humble, in this pattern of practice, you will actually spend a total of 4 weeks per trait per year. Does it seem much more plausible that you will see a real effect after spending a month in a year cultivating each of your priority qualities? Still, there is nothing magical about the number 13, and experience has taught me that some people can get completely paralyzed by having to come up with a list that long. It is fine to start with just a few, as 5 or 6 identified soul traits. As time goes on, your own observations of yourself may cause you to add to your list. 13 qualities and a whole year might also seem like a big bite to chew, but as you'll soon see, all the steps are actually small and manageable to prepare you to go through the task of identifying your own spiritual curriculum. I will describe some of the steps you can take that will help you know whether a trait ought to be on your list or not. Using an accounting of the soul diary. Some traits that are all too well known to you will leap onto your list. Or perhaps in reading or reviewing the chapters in part 2 of this book, something you need to work on became clear to you. There will likely be other qualities that need to be discovered. When asked how a person could become familiar with his or her own character traits, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe answers, if one would keep a daily accounting of the traits that arise in every given situation, after a few weeks, he will be able to tell which trait manifests itself most often. Rabbi Wolbe is referring to the practice known as an accounting of the soul. This practice embodies a systematic process of self-observation and the accounting that provides you with clear knowledge of the forces and contours of your own inner landscape. Like an accountant doing an audit, when you do the accounting of the soul, you observe your life and sort out a balance sheet of your inner being. The conscious mind now gains access to features of the unconscious and becomes aware of the soul traits that shape your everyday existence. This new awareness is crucial to the journey of transformation and ascent. Accounting of the soul practice involves keeping a journal. Starting that journal in the right way is the first concrete step in Mussar practice and can help you compose your list of traits. Later, you will use your journal in a different way. Once your practice begins to focus on the traits on your list, equip yourself with a notebook. I've found that a nothing fancy lined coil notebook from the local drugstore works just fine for the job. More recently, I have used bound blank books and even sketching books. The only rule I suggest is not getting a very small notebook because it may disappear too easily. Place the notebook beside your bed along with a pen and prepare to make some notes every evening. The norm is to make an entry as you are retiring for the night. Some people are so tired by the time they get to bed that this isn't the ideal time for them. And if that's true for you, then look for another point in your day that works for you. One student found that it worked well to keep her journal by her coffee pot. I know that coffee pot, yeah, it's definitely a stopping point in my day. At this stage, what you are to record in your journal is any experience you had in the last 24 hours that tells you something about one of your soul traits. With your journal open and pen in hand, take a moment to cast your mind back over the day. Did anything take place that in any way reflects any of the 18 soul traits described in this book? You can use the table of content as a prompt. Mentally run through your day looking to see if any of the listed traits made an appearance in your experiences. These traits may show up in something you did or said, or in thoughts you had or sensations you experienced. Even if you didn't speak or act on those notions, a quality may leap right out at you. You lost your temper with your kids, or you got coerced into saying yes to something you know you shouldn't have taken on. Did you have an opportunity to give charity that you let pass by? Are you aware that you spoke falsely, gossiped, or at the other end of the spectrum, told the truth when it was so difficult to do so? Or you may have to think and probe a bit to uncover the imprint of your soul as it shaped your day. But I assure you the imprint is there. One thing to pay particular attention to is something I discussed in Chapter 4, the concept of Bakira points. Recall that what Rabbi Dressler named as Bakira points are those particular inner places where issues of choice are very lively in you. He was describing the front line where, when put to the test, good and evil turn out to be well balanced, and so any decision you make could go either way. On one side, the evil inclination, or the Yetzer Hatov, the good inclination; on the other side, the evil inclination. The place where they meet and contend is your Bakira points. You can identify soul traits that ought to be noted in your journal by paying close attention to the struggles you wage on the front line in your inner life. Ask yourself, which Bakira points are my challenges? Think of and be alert to those situations where you can feel yourself teetering on the brink of a choice between one option you know to be good and another that, while it is bound to be attractive, isn't in the best interest of the soul. Whenever you find yourself to be struggling in that unconfirmed no man's land between that which elevates and that which doesn't, try to name the territory where the struggle takes place. The name you assign will be that of a relevant soul trait. If you pass a homeless person and you feel inclined to give money, but you hold back and your hand goes into your pocket, but it doesn't quickly come out holding anything, that wavering is the sign of a Bakira point. Wow. You can discover your own balancing point. It's a Bakira point of the soul trait of generosity. Or if you feel grateful for something and you think of expressing your thanks, but you worry that you won't say the right thing or find the right moment, so you stay silent, but that doesn't feel right either. So you look at it again. This is all happening in the territory of gratitude. And so on with all soul traits. The question is, where are the front lines in your own battles to choose and decide? These examples I just gave you, that the challenges that take place at your Bakira points need not be monumental. In fact, what you are really looking to detect are the little tremors that take place in everyday life that are important, not because they are large, but because they reveal the fault lines that run beneath the surface of your life. By becoming aware of the habits, patterns, and tendencies that are revealed in the hundreds of choices you make every day, especially in the areas that have the ripest potential for growth, which are your Bakira points, you will know where to put your efforts without waiting to learn those lessons from a massive earthquake. What you see, record, note in your notebook any incident that reveals one of your soul traits. Your task is to make a brief note of the thought, feeling, words, or acts within which you can identify the play of a soul trait. Objectivity is what you seek here, avoiding self judgment of any kind. One student relates how he let his diary work for him in this way. I just watch myself, and when something happens that upsets me, that makes me want to lash out at people or hurts me or makes me want to turn from them altogether. I try to identify what quality in me that is. Sometimes the answer is surprising. I go from very real and concrete events and emotions to identifying general and foundational character traits. Your journal will begin to reveal traits that you can place on your list. Does arrogance show up because you can detect incidents that reveal a tendency to puff up your ego like a peacock? Or do you maybe see the opposite tendency, allowing yourself too readily to be walked over? Many of us lead isolated lives, spending too much time in a one-to-one relationship to electronic media, or working in cubicles, or driving alone in cars, and so on. Those of us afflicted with emotional isolation might place the sole trait of compassion or loving kindness on our lists, since these two traits bring us to intimate relationships with others. As you observe your behavior, record incidences and identify the relevant soul traits. Try to find your list of 13 soul traits from the 18 covered in part 2. These 18 chapters address general topics that cover much of what goes on in our inner lives as it relates to our soul traits. I have seen students get lost and confused by trying to invent categories, some of which turned out not even to be inner qualities at all, like money or abundance. So use these chapters to help you identify soul traits that truly do need your attention. There is a common tendency to be fascinated with new and different, with the new and different, of which we need to be wary. While it may be entirely justified to add to your list a quality that isn't among the ones I've presented in this book, do so only if you feel clearly and strongly compelled to pinpoint that particular additional trait. In most cases, you'll find that if you think about it a bit, the something else that you want to work on can find a place under one of the 18 traits already listed. Students have often asked me if there is a complete list of soul traits, and I have not come across such a resource. In response, I have created a list culled from various Moosa sources. You'll find that long list in the appendix. There is nothing wrong with recording incidents that reveal strong or balanced traits. The real quarry, however, is traits that appear to you as sources of suffering, confusion, conflict, or any other negative outcome. You might be able to identify that you feel you've got too much of a trait, like anger, for example, or it could be too little, like calmness. Too little anger expressed as passion and vitality is also a possibility. As you keep your daily diary, whenever a single quality shows up more than once, add that one to your list. Any quality that could benefit from some measure of change belongs on your list. And if you already feel you are adequately generous, for example, you've identified one trait you don't need on your list. You may get your 13 right away quite easily. If so, you can jump into the next phase of practice, but it may take you a week or two to come up with your list. If it takes more than a month to identify the full 13, start with what you have and keep an eye out for what else you could add later on. Don't fall into obsessing over the choice of your 13 qualities because it is actually hard to go seriously wrong. It's actually hard to go seriously wrong, even if you put a quality on your list that turns out not to be such an important one for you. It won't do you any harm to keep paying attention to that one too. For example, just because you don't make habit of lying doesn't mean that you won't be able to get some benefit out of having truth on your list. And if you happen to miss out on a quality that really ought to be on your list, don't worry about that either. You can pick it up on the next round. Yeah, don't become neurotic, folks. Yeah. And in the meantime, you will be surprised to find yourself doing good work on that quality anyway, because the Moosa practice has the effect of making you more aware and more committed to yourself in general. Even if you are working on one individual quality at a time. We learned from Rabbi Dressler that initially a person should always look for positive traits to focus on. He means that the best way to reduce a negative trait is to try to build up another counterbalancing trait. Does that make sense? The best way to reduce a negative trait is to try to build up another counterbalancing trait. If you see yourself as too angry, look for a trait that embodies the opposite of anger. Then you would put calmness or humility on your list, not anger. If you are judgmental and jealous, the corresponding positive trait might be honor. If you come to see yourself as overly concerned with material possessions, put simplicity on your list. Maybe the clearest example is stinginess. Don't try to be less of a miser. Practice generosity, and so on. Wherever you identify behavior that is damaging and does not reflect Torah values, seek to name a positive counterpart and add that one to your list, not the negative one. Rabbi Mir Chodesh once discussed the trait of anger and pointed out that it is not the trait of anger that needs working on, but the trait of goodwill. Once a person's anger is aroused, it is too late to work on it. However, if one maintains goodwill and sees things in a positive light, one will never reach the point of getting angry. Very important. It is said about Rabbi Chodesh that in general, he did not deal with bad character traits. He preferred to deal with the positive, to develop themes that exalt the personality and raise it higher and higher. Through this, a person will naturally keep his distance from the ugly and the degraded. There are several reasons for always choosing a positive trait as the focus for your Moosa practice. One is that it avoids a major pitfall of any discipline of self improvement, which is that you develop negative feelings about yourself because you aren't perfect. I've had students become aware of a truth about themselves that was very hard to bear. Others have suddenly seen flaws in the world at large and so have become very judgmental of other people. Working on positive traits makes this negativity less likely. There is also a spin-off to be gained from strengthening a positive trait. Even a small success in an area of strength will generate successes in weaker areas as well. But the most important reason to stay focused on positive traits is the Musser axiom that efforts to reduce negative traits are almost always doomed to failure. If you become sensitive to your own excessive anger, for example, and you then try to reduce your anger, that would be like trying to get a fire to cool down. You are no more likely to be able to reduce anger directly than you are able to get a fire to lose heat. Instead, what you need to do is find whatever will serve as the water in the particular situation. The guideline to stay with positive qualities and to use positive traits to work on a negative one is very important to Moosa practice. Remembering this principle will save you a lot of potential grief along the way. And in the words of Orkot Zadakim, it will straighten the road to the great king's court. Calling on one soul trait to affect another soul trait relies heavily on your self awareness because you need to be able to identify not only your troublesome soul trait, but also a positive one you can call on to strengthen. It follows that the list you make up should only have positive traits on it. As you identify the traits that belong on your list, write them on the first page or in the inside front cover of your notebook, where you'll have easy reference to them. Concerning your list, one question that comes up frequently is, what if a selected trait doesn't feel right or hold your interest? My advice is not to switch horses midstream. Each trait you work on is only a small part of the practice. So being a little bored or uncomfortable needn't undercut all the other good work you'll do. Just practice persistence. It's entirely possible that the resistance you may feel may be pointing to something worthy of your attention. In time, the shell that you are bouncing off will crack open to reveal something you didn't know about yourself. And again, because you can't be cautioned too often, pay close attention to that little inner voice that complains and deflects you from the process in whatever creative ways it may crop up. As you think of your journal and making your list of traits, one night you might hear, not tonight, and another night, that's a stupid quality. But if you stand in awareness as the witness to your inner dialogue, you may notice that the whispering you are hearing is very similar and maybe even strikingly familiar. You can test that voice by asking if it seems to be offering guidance that is likely to contribute to the well being of your soul. Hear it, know it for what it is, and continue to place one foot in front of the other on your journey of ascent. You know what? And I think we're going to stop it there for today because we're not having a ton of views, and it's always disheartening when we don't get a turnout, but I'm always overjoyed when we do, and I'm not going to be dissuaded. I keep going at it just like this encourages. I believe in trying to be consistent, and yeah. So yeah, we will we'll call it a day for Rocky Mountain readings, but we will be back tomorrow. Or not tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thursday. So yeah, we'll aim to do another continuation tomorrow. We'll start with daily practice tomorrow. Hopefully you've gotten something out of this today and how to implement everything we've read so far, how they've taken all these 18 traits that we went into detail about, and now how to work on it in life. And I love the counterbalancing effect. Rather than focus on that negative trait, look at its counterbalancing positive one and work on that, and it will, allow you to make gains even in the negative ones. So beautiful, beautiful practice. And this is things that have been practiced for 1,000 years. Yeah, tried and true. And yeah, hopefully it's something that somebody will implement if need be. And that they're blessed in their endeavors and grow spiritually and draw closer to Almighty God. It's beautiful, beautiful material. So I'm going to sign out for today. I am aiming to be back tomorrow here on Rocky Mountain Readings, Hashem willing. Hey, Italo, nice to see you there. Anyways, I did another broadcast last night with my friend Steve Eisenhower in the Spiritual Abuse series. And yesterday we talked about monetary abuse and the prosperity gospel or doctrine in the Christian church. So I'll be posting that out there as well. It's something to keep a lookout on. I mean, it's always nice to see people set free from abusive scenarios and situations. And we want to encourage people into true positive light and let the light of Hashem shine and make the world a better place. So I'm going to sign out for today. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.